أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Holy Quran what he says is the truth in the chapter of Al-A'la. He says, سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in these verses, he says, exalt your Lord, exalt in the name of your Lord, he who created and made in a perfect form, فسوى. وَالَّذِي قَدَّرَ فَهَدَى, and he who precisely and meticulously and in detail perfected that form, and then he set it off guided, whether it's through instinct or whether it's through the intellect or whether it's through guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides through His holy book and His representatives. صدق الله العلي العظيم. آمنا بالله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's start first with a short dua that I like to do at the beginning of every lecture. So let's raise our hands together and let's do this dua. Rabbi shrah li sadri. Oh Allah, open up my heart and my mind to receive the information I'm about to gain. Wa yassir li amri, and ease my affairs. Wahlul uqdatan min lisani, and untie the knots in my tongue. Yafqahu qawli, so that they may understand what I'm about to say. Rabbi arini al-haqqa haqqan fa'attabi'ah. Oh Allah, let me see the truth as the truth so that I may follow it. Wal-batila batilan fa'ajtanibah, and falsehood as falsehood so that I may avoid it. وَلَا تَجْعَلْهُ مُتَشَابِهًا عَلَيَّ, and don't let there be a confusion between the two. فَأَتَّبِعْ هَوَايَ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ, lest I follow my whims without even knowing. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. In the last few nights, we covered quite a few topics. The first was answering the question of whether God exists or not. And we were able to answer that question with two simple proofs. The first being the proof of organization, in which we proved that the world is organized and everything organized has an organizer, therefore the world has an organizer. We also covered the proof of the unlimited creator, in which we were able to answer those three questions of whether there is one creator or more, what is the most important characteristic of that creator, and what is the most important, and what does that mean to me, I should say. So we used the proof of the unlimited creator, which was very simple, and I'll give you the short version, just to recap, so that we make sure, in Hawza, this is what we do before we start a class. We recap what we took before. Usually the first 5 to 10 or 15 minutes is recapping, and then the last 5 to 10 or 15 minutes, depending on the length of the class, is new material. So we said we look at creators, we find that there's a commonality between them, and that is that a creator is greater than what they create, right, Nick? So that means then, we said, since a creator is greater than what they create, just like a cook is greater than the food that they cook, just like your mom is greater than the fact that she's just a mother, right? She's more than that, right? Just like an engineer is more than just being an engineer, right? He's someone's son, right? So that means the creator is greater than what they create. And we said, let's apply that then to the world of limitation, to everything limited. And we said, okay, so then that means the creator of everything limited is not limited by limitation, which means he is unlimited. Exactly, Ahsantum. And we said being unlimited means he doesn't have a beginning, he doesn't have an end, which means he always existed and will always exist, which means he's everywhere, he sees all things, he knows all things. It also means that he has no flaws, because flaws are limitations, exactly. And therefore he is flawless, which means that he is all perfect, exactly. Ahsantum. And since he's all perfect, that means he's all wise, right? That means he's all just. That means he's all purposeful. He doesn't do anything without a purpose, which means I have a purpose, Brother Sajjad, you have a purpose, Brother Shahid, you have a purpose, Brother Abul Fadl, you have a purpose, Brother Murtada, Brother Sharif, Brother Ahmed, Sayyid Hussein, Nick, all of us, Hajjaj of course, can't forget them, right? All of us have a purpose, right? And we were brought for a purpose. We also said, before speaking about what that purpose is that since the all-perfect created us, then that means that we have great value, right? It means that we have great self-worth. Even if other people don't appreciate our self-worth because they're not aware of this paradigm-shifting reality, right? it does not in any way detract from your own self-worth. Why? Because we said that self-worth, since it's given to us by our Creator, right, then it is intrinsic, it is inborn, right? Each one of us has it as soon as we come to this world, as soon as we are created. From the world of the Adam, when we are created, to this very day, to this, when we're in this world, the world of dunya, we have value, right? And when we move out of this world of dunya, we still have value, okay? So that means then everything around me has great worth, which means then I'm going to treat everything based on that worth. So instead of shying away from getting to know people, right, Brother Sharif, instead I'll take a step forward, right, and put the initiative to get to know you, what you're about, what you represent. Why? Because Allah deemed you worthy of existing, and therefore you have great value, and therefore you add something to me and to this world, right? So now that I understand this, now what happens is I realize that a person who believes in God, right, becomes a person who is a social being, right, who loves to know people, who loves to learn from people, and also a person who is a steward of this world, meaning that he cares for everyone, right? كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. Each of you is a shepherd, and each of you is responsible for his herd. So that means then that I'm going to care for your health and your wealth, right? I'm going to care for your mental well-being, right? I'm not going to just ignore you, right? When I see that poor person in the street, I'm not going to ignore them and make as though they don't exist. But rather, I might even want to get to know them. And why did they get here? And how did they get here? And how can I help you get out of what you're in right now? Do you need mental help, right? You need to be placed in a facility. Do you need financial help? Do you need training in order to get a job, right? I'm going to care about everyone and everything, and I will care about the environment as well, right? I will care about the environment. Why? Because who created the environment? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which means it has a purpose and it has a value. So I must value it as much as my Creator values it. You see? So based on that, a person who is a Muslim, is a muwahhid, who believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will be a person who recycles, who cares about the ecosystem, right, Nick? Yeah? Not a person who litters, right? Okay. So it becomes then a way of me understanding that I have great responsibility in this world just from realizing this paradigm shifting reality that the Creator is unlimited. Just from that, I was able to determine that I have great worth and I have great value, and everybody around me does, and now I've become a better human being. I've realized a purpose that I might not have realized before. But the other purpose I realize is this, is that since He created me, just like my parents brought me to this world, and I have a sense of obligation towards them because they have this right upon me, because Abu Fadl, what did you say before? We said that they raised me, right? They fed me, they taught me, they educated me, they taught me how to walk and talk. As you said, they even changed my diapers, right? So I know for a fact then I owe them, and I always want to please them. Even when they leave this world, I say, Ya Allah, I wish my dad was here to see my son now, how proud I am of him and how proud he would be of him, right? I wish my grandmother was here, right? You feel this sense of obligation, and the sense of wanting to please them. And we said, why? Because they have this great right upon us. And so, by priority, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who created them and their parents and gave me the very breath with which I breathe, and this very intellect with which I'm able to realize Allah's existence in my life and His importance, right? That He, by priority, has the greatest right upon me, right? And so, I must strive to do what? To please Him first and foremost. So once I realize that, then everything else becomes easy. Why? Because now I'm focusing on this great purpose. And the greater purpose is what? Is to show gratitude and appreciation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He allowed me to exist and to know Him. That He deemed me worthy of knowing Him. You see? That is truly paradigm shifting. Okay? And we said paradigm shifting means that this is a principle now, right? That I might have had other principles, but I just discovered this is such an important principle that everything now starts from this foundation, right? From the foundation of Tawheed. And that's what it's called. We mentioned Imam Ali salamullahi alayhi. He says, as is mentioned in the first sermon in the book Nahj al-Balagha, which we mentioned is a book that you need to make sure you have in your library or on your phone, right? In which he says, أَوَّلُ الدِّينِ مَعْرِفَتُهُ, that the first of religion is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And then he said what? وَكَمَالُ مَعْرِفَتِهِ التَّصْدِيقُ بِهِ. And the best way to know him is to prove his existence, which is what we did, right? وَكَمَالُ التَّصْدِيقِ بِهِ is what? And the best way to know him is tawheedah, is to have tawheed, right? Which is to be able to prove not only does he exist, but he is unlimited, unlimited in mercy, unlimited in tolerance, unlimited in kindness, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists and he has all of these characteristics, and that I must be aware of his existence, and that I must fulfill my purpose based on that fundamental paradigm of tawheed. Got it? If you got it, say you got it. Yeah. Good. So then the Imam continues and he says, وَكَمَالُ تَوْحِيدِهِ الْإِخْلَاصُ لَهُ. The best way to have tawheed is to dedicate every single part of you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And intellectually we were able to come to this conclusion because we said, I must show appreciation to my Lord. With what? Am I able to give appreciation to my Lord without anything that he gave me? No, right? I have to use everything that he gave me, every single faculty that he afforded me, right? My eyesight, my hearing, my words, my tongue, my hands, my feet, my belly, everything, right? Towards pleasing Allah first and foremost, you see? So once I realize this then, I realize, okay, great. So then, now I recognize what my true purpose is. And we mentioned that, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this game of life, right? Just as we mentioned when we're playing in a game, on a game console, such as if we're playing the Call of Duty or we're playing, Forza or we're playing some other game, right? Every level we go through, we have to perfect ourselves, perfect our decisions, understand what's right, what's wrong, and in every decision that we make, there are going to be another number of decisions and choices in front of me. And we said choice is good. And we said since choice is good, then Allah would give it to us. He would give us choice. Even if that means that we may not choose him. He's that fair, right? Because we said he's all just. He wouldn't oppress, not even an atom's worth, not even a quark's worth, right? We also said that being forced to do something is bad. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not do anything that is bad because he's all perfect, right? So he must give me choice. So now that I understand this, I say, okay, so then whatever comes my way is going to be for a purpose, number one, because he's all purposeful. It's going to be out of his wisdom because he's all wise. I might feel the pressure of the struggle, of the challenge that I'm facing, depending on which phase or level I am in this game of life, okay? But Allah will not burden me with more than I can handle because he is all just. He would not oppress me, right? That we proved that because he's unlimited, he's all perfect. Agreed? If you agree, say I agree. Also then, that means that in every part of my life, from when I am born, I come to this world, my biggest worry is, the milk that I drink and the diaper that needs to be changed, right? To when I start turning, to when I start crawling, to when I start walking, falling on my face, getting back up again, falling again, getting back up again, right? Never giving up, right? Realizing that this is a challenge that I must, complete. And once I complete it, now I want to run. Then I want to swim, right? And so on. In every level of my life, I'm given a challenge, right, that I can handle. And once I perfect that level, then and only then will I be able to move on to the next challenge and the next struggle that my Creator gives me. And we were able to determine that trials and tribulations, they are part of the system. And these challenges that Allah gives us are custom made for us. Custom made, right? And so what should I do? I should own them. Why? Because they're from Allah. Now we said there are challenges or trials and tribulations that come directly from Allah. And then there are those that come from human choice. Some come from my own choices. Others come from others' choices, right? So, if the trial is from Allah, such as an earthquake or a tsunami or a natural disaster or sickness, we said that since Allah gave me this trial, then it is for my own benefit, right? إِذَا أَحَبَّ اللَّهُ عَبْدًا ابْتَلَاهُ إِمَّا بِمَرَضٍ وَإِمَّا بِحَاجَةٍ وَإِلَّا عَسَّرَ عَلَيْهِ الْمَوْتِ. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, according to the book of Al-Kafi, in the book of Al-Ibtila, right? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves a believer, then he will try him and he will test him with what? Either with sickness or with a need, or he will make his end of life one that is tough. Now we look at it and we say, why? Why this seems unfair? No. What does the Imam say? He says, look, he says, وَإِلَّا عَسَّرَ عَلَيْهِ الْمَوْتِ. Why? حَتَّى تَحُطُّ عَنْهُ الذُّنُوبِ كَمَا يَحُطُّ الْوَرَقَ عَنِ الشَّجَرِ. So that his sins fall off of him just as the leaves fall off a tree. See? So even then, in the struggle at the end of life, there is rahmah and mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there is purpose, you see? Okay? So, if a test or a trial and tribulation comes from my choice, and I poison my body by smoking, then whose fault is that? My fault or Allah's? My fault, right? But even within that, He doesn't make it something that I cannot handle, right? Why? Because He is fair, and it is within His system, and His system is going to be fair. I may poison His system, but I still have a chance to repent, right? I still have a chance, to make the right choices. And even in that period, right, I'm going to realize the error of my ways, and I'm going to fix my relationship with Allah and fix my relationship with others. You see, if I get that sense of awareness and I understand my true need for my Creator, right? Then, if there are choices that come from others, we said, like for example, someone ruthlessly bombing innocent people, as we're seeing today, right, from Netanyahu, right? Okay, and his goons. And what do we see here? We say, oh wow, this is senseless. We said, look, earthquakes aren't senseless because Allah chooses for the person to die in that area of the world. We said fault lines relieve pressure from the earth, otherwise the entire earth would explode, right? So those who die in those spots, but since Allah chose that death for them, then it is fair. We might not understand it, but it is fair. It is their time. Allah has determined it. And those who end up being injured, then this is a trial and a struggle for them to show their resilience, their grit, their tolerance, and their gratitude to Allah for allowing them to live, right? And to realize the blessing that they are in by being alive, right? Correcting their ways, the errors of their ways. So what about then wars, such as these poor innocent people who are dying in Palestine, right? Or in Lebanon, right? Or the poor people who were slaughtered for years from our brothers and sisters from the Hazara who are in Afghanistan, right? Just for loving Ali ibn Abi Talib, salamullahi alayhi, right? So what have they done, right? Why is it that these old tribes of Quraysh in the Arabian Peninsula used to bury, some of the tribes, not all of them, used to bury their girls, their newborn girls, because they didn't want a girl, they wanted a boy. What is their fault, right? We said here, look, what we have to always remember is this, is that when it comes to these sorts of issues, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, since He allowed within the system choice, that means the very nature of the system allows bad choices and good choices. So I'm going to be at the butt end of a bad choice, right? But even if that happens, I will be able to handle it. If I end up dying in that process, then I will have great reward. Why? Because I know Allah is all just, right? Allah is all wise. There will be a reason. Others will benefit from seeing me, suffering or seeing me dying, right? And I will benefit. For example, these children who die, or a person who is martyred in the way of Allah, say that he is not dead, but rather he is sustained with his Lord, right? Which means that what? He has a great level, right? He's with the Anbiya, right? So that means what? That means that Allah is all fair and all just. Now, of course, we also spoke about chaos theory and coincidence. We proved there's no coincidence as in randomness, but coincidence that coincide, right? In time or in space, and usually the result of choice or physical laws of nature, right? And we also talked about chaos, and we said chaos is actually chaos theory. It is a term from the beginning. So then we moved on to Benoit Mandelbrot, and we said Benoit Mandelbrot, the father of fractal mathematics, right, has 15 PhDs, held the chair of Einstein, was able to prove that everything comes down to a fractal. Yes? And that fractal multiplied then forms whatever. For example, one cell, okay, forms what? One cell with another cell, a third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Next thing you know, you have an onion sheath, right? If you have onion cells, right? Okay. Next thing you know, you have a whole leaf, just like we see there in the plant, right? We said that that proves what? That everything is organized at the end of the road, right? And of course, Benoit Mandelbrot, you can go back to yesterday's lecture, and inshallah, you can watch it, listen to it, maybe while you're driving in your car, inshallah, you will benefit. I'm not going to repeat all of it, there's a lot of information, okay, but it's very simple, and inshallah, you will benefit from it. Today, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, our topic today is evolution, okay? And evolution is something that has been sold to us in schools and marketed to us in the media as though it is what? As though it is reality, and it is true 100%. Agreed? Yes? Okay. So, To this day, I even hear people still say, well, in the days, even scholars, who are scientists, right? Paleontologists and anthropologists who say that, when we were apes, this is what we used to do, and that is why we are the way we are today. Hunter-gatherers, right? Okay, that's what they tell us. So the reality is that we really have to try to figure out, what does evolution tell us? What are the different types of evolution? Who came up with evolution? How did it end up being basically, a staple food in our biology classes, right? And how did it turn to a reality if it was just a hypothesis or a theory that hasn't been proven yet, or has it been proven yet? We don't know. We'll find out today. So let's talk about evolution then. Now, when we say evolution, or any word that we take, we always have to start by defining it, right? So we define it linguistically. This is what we do in the Hausa. We first lagawiyan, right? See what lugawiyan, afwan, not lagawiyan, lugawiyan. What is the definition? Meaning linguistically, what is the definition? And then, as depending on the field of science that we're looking at, we say, okay, in this field of science, how is this word defined? Okay, Yusuf? So let's look at the word evolution. Evolution means what? Means the change and development of something over the course of time. This is the linguistic meaning. Okay. So for example, when I see, let's say, someone that I've known ever since they were a kid, and I'm an older person, I would say, mashallah, I've seen how he's evolved over the years, right? When I see, for example, a student who goes into the Hausa or goes into school, starts his bachelor's, let's say, completes his master's and his PhD, and I say, wow, I saw the evolution of his, academic career, right? It evolved in such a way. I see that his thinking evolved over time, right? You might look at yourself and say, well, I evolved since those days of Jahiliyyah, right? Okay? So that means then to evolve is to change and to develop over the course of time. Now, what is the definition when it comes to science? In science, it's also to change and to develop over time, but the Stanford Encyclopedia also makes the addition of adding that this is in reference to what? To changes within biological systems. Okay? So, in order to understand evolution, before we get into the types of evolution, because that's what we'll talk about, so we define it first, then we look at the history of evolution, okay? Who came up with that term? How did it come to be what it is today? Then what are the types of evolution, okay? And then we're going to look at the Human Genome Project. So just so you know, this is what we're going to do, okay? So we defined evolution, number one, we got that out of the way. Now we want to look at who is the founder of this idea of evolution as we know it in science. And this man is by the name of Charles Darwin. Now Charles Darwin lived from 1809 and he died in 1882. And in the year 1835, he had a great expedition where he actually went around the world in order to catalog the plants of the world. Okay? How did this come to be? How did he end up on this expedition to travel around the world to catalog the plants of the world? And what do plants have to do with apes and evolution, right? You might be wondering. Well, you see, Charles Darwin, from an early age, he had an interest in plants. His father was a physician. He wanted him to be a physician as well, a doctor, right? Okay? Just like most, Middle Easterns, their parents want them to be doctors, right? So, his dad wanted him to be a doctor, but he had this love for plants and love for botany. And so much so that he would go around with his book, right? This blank book, and he would literally jot down and draw, right, all of these plants. And he would write their names, write their characteristics, and he developed an entire catalog that he would then present to the Royal Botanical Society. And they would accept it and they would encourage him to go on an expedition around the world so that he can catalog all the plants of the world. So he convinces his dad to bankroll this trip, right? To get him a ship, right? To rent a sailor that would take him around the world so that he can, catalog all of the plants around the world. Now with him was also a map maker, someone who would actually draw and jot down the shape of the different landforms that they would pass by. So on his trip in 1835, he would get to these groupings of islands called the Galapagos Islands, right? And that's, many of you have probably heard of the Galapagos turtle, right? So this is where he was, in that area. Now in the Galapagos Islands, he noticed two things. He noticed finches, okay? He noticed that the finches in one island had a different beak than the finches in another island. in comparison to a third island and a fourth and a fifth. And he cataloged all of this. And he said, okay, well, it looks like by natural selection, because of their diet, right? Some ate seeds, some ate worms. Those who ate seeds had thick, chunky kind of beaks. Those who ate worms had longer beaks, right? But they were all finches, you see? They were all from the same species. Now, the other thing that he noticed was the bear and the whale. And I want to read an excerpt for you, because nowhere in his book, because he ended up when collecting all of this information, he ends up writing a book called The Origin of the Species. This is the book that Darwin is famous for. So in chapter 6 of his book, he writes about the bear and the whale. Now listen to this carefully. What does he say? He says, in North America, the black bear was seen by him, swimming for hours with widely open mouth. Okay? Thus catching, like a whale, insects in the water. Now that could include small fish or shrimp or that sort of thing. He continues and he says, I can see no difficulty in a race of bears being rendered by natural selection more and more aquatic. So he's saying that a bear, who is a land mammal, okay, he can foresee how this animal might slowly change into a whale, become more aquatic. And he says this. He says, in their structure and habits. Okay? He says, in a race of bears being rendered by natural selection more and more aquatic in their structure and habits, with larger and larger mouths, till a creature was produced as monstrous as a whale. Nowhere in his book does he say that man originated from apes, but rather, because, we usually hear that everything came from the ocean and then got onto land, right? And so before even apes, right, you had things that were water dwellers that then became amphibious, that then became animals that would breathe air fully and not need water, and then they would develop into whatever they developed, right? Okay, that's what we learn in school. But Darwin doesn't say this in the origin of the species, but rather he says he foresees a land mammal eventually developing a bigger mouth, right? Turning into being more aquatic, and then eventually turning into something as monstrous as a whale. So where did they get this from? Okay? So this is what I wanted you to know about the origin of the species and Charles Darwin so far. Got it? If you got it, say khosh. Good. Good. Now next, we want to say, now that we understand where this idea of evolution came from and what Darwin actually originally said, okay? Now what we need to do is we need to understand contemporary evolution. What is it and how is it defined? Now, in contemporary science, we find that evolution is either microevolution or macroevolution. Now, what is micro? What is macro? Micro is the change of an organism either on a genetic level or a cellular level, such that it adapts to its environment. And this usually occurs as a result of something called natural selection. Okay, Abul Fadl? Now, what is natural selection? Let me break it down for you, okay, in case this is too much science, right? You ever seen those videos on Discovery, right? Where the lion, or the cheetah is running fast, right? And then the gazelle is running even faster, but eventually the cheetah catches that gazelle, right? Now, we say what? We say, oh, see, he caught the weak gazelle, right? Only the stronger gazelles survived. So this is what is called survival of the fittest. The same thing with other cheetahs who couldn't capture their prey, right? Those are the weaker cheetahs. They end up dying out, correct? And only the strong survive. So this is natural selection. This is a result of microevolution. Now, what is macroevolution? Macroevolution is the changing of an organism from one species to another, right? So, for example, an ape changing to a human being, or let's say a bear changing to a whale, right? Okay, you see? Totally different species. Now here, is there evidence of this? Now, natural selection, we all agree with. We see it on TV all the time. There's nothing wrong with it. But is there enough evidence for one species turning into another? Now, when we look into the science, what we found is no, really there isn't. How do we know this? Well, the theory that they have is that since apes and humans look very similar, that our ancestors were actually apes, okay? Now, how can they prove this? They found the bones of, obviously, humans over the centuries. Then they looked at the bones of apes over the centuries. And then they found that there's a missing link. There's this one species that they need to discover that connects the ape with a human being. Okay? And they called this the missing link. What did they call it? The missing link. Okay? Now, over the course of the years, I should say, what happened? They started to search. Paleontologists, anthropologists started to search for this missing link. Every time they would find something, they would say, oh, it's the missing link, and then it turns out that it's wrong. For example, first it was the Neanderthal. Okay? Then they discovered, no, this is actually a human that actually had a lot of growth hormone and that's why it had the thick brow ridge, that's why it had the big knuckles, that's why it had a condition called giganticism. Okay? And this is because of the overproduction of growth hormone from the endocrine system. So they said, okay, so this is not the missing link. Then they moved on and they found a few others. And I'll name some for you now. Okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. ثانية على حب الحسن والحسين. I'm only going to name 8. There are many more. Okay? So the first was Neanderthal man. The next one was Java man. The next one, known as Homo erectus. The next one was Piltdown man. The fourth one was Tongue child, okay, known as Australopithecus africanus. Then there was Heidelberg man. Okay, then there was Homo habilis. Okay, in 1964. Then there was Lucy. Now Lucy was the closest thing that they have. Of course, all of these they discovered were apes. Okay, Lucy was interesting because Lucy was just a jaw. They found a small jaw. Okay, all of a sudden you see in the news and everywhere, right? We found a jaw. This is the missing link. So next thing you know, they form a symmetrical jaw that's on the other side, right? Then they start to find teeth. Then they start to find the skull. Now, of course, this guy who discovered it, the paleontologist, now he's like rolling in the grant money because he needs more money to be able to uncover this reality. Is this truly the missing link or not? And he claimed 100% that it is the missing link, right? Eventually, what did it turn out to be? It turned out to be a small ape, nothing else. Okay, so that was a fail. So lastly, they had the last one I'll mention to you is called Australopithecus sediba. They had something also that they called Alex, but still at the end of the road, they ended up abandoning this idea of the missing link. Today, nobody tells you that they found the missing link. Why? Because they haven't. Okay, so they haven't found that connection. So now that we understand this, we say, okay, well, scientifically then, the theory of evolution so far has not been proven. So why do they teach it to us as fact? Right? I want you to think about that right now. I'm going to address that in a minute. Okay. Lastly, we want to talk about the Human Genome Project. We're on this point right now. The Human Genome Project, right? What is the Human Genome Project? So modern scientists geneticists decided to actually map the human genome. Now, how did they do this? They collected the the DNA, the genetic material of every animal out there, right? And they started to compare. Okay. And what did they find? They found that the genetics, the DNA of an ape is 99% similar to the genetics of what? Of a human being. 99% or 93%, something like that. Okay? It was in the 90s. Okay? So, what do they conclude? They say, yes. There you go. Proved it. There are cousins. Okay? There are ancestors. Now, when you say ancestors, that usually means that they've died out. They're extinct, and now you have the new species. You know, we haven't seen any cases where they've shown that two species coexist where one was the ancestor of the other. We don't have that in science. So this is interesting. This is something to think about as well, right? If we evolved, if all of them evolved into us, then why do they still exist, right? Think about that, right? But let's look at the Human Genome Project. Now let me inform you of this. When you look at a fruit fly, okay, you know how when you leave bananas overnight, next day they turn brown. Next thing you know, you've got these tiny little fruit flies flying around, pesky little things, right? Did you know that we share 37% of our DNA with the fruit fly? Right? 37% of our DNA is similar to a fruit fly. Does that mean there are ancestors too? Does that mean that there are cousins? No, right? So then what can I conclude from this genetic material? There's similarity between me and a fruit fly. There's definitely similarity between me and a leopard when it comes to the genetics then, right? Because there is a similarity between me and apes and monkeys and so on. So how does that happen? Well, here's the thing. Every single creation has what? Has genetic code. Now, if you're a programmer, you understand code, right? Okay, because code basically is what? Is a base program, right? Now, you're going to have a variable that represents eyes, a variable that represents, what you smell with or sense with, an olfactory system, with what you hear with, your ears, or, whether you have ears or not. Now, let's say, for example, a leopard has ears that's above their head, right? Ours are on the side of our head, but we both have ears, right? Now, this variable for ear for us is different, right? Our cochlea inside the auditory meatus is different than that of what, meaning the apparatus for hearing, okay? That's different, not as sensitive as the one for an animal such as a fox or a cheetah or a lion or a cat, the common household cat, right? But they have ears, we have ears. They have eyes, we have eyes, right? But our vision differs from theirs. But in the genetic code, right? I have eyes, they have eyes. I have ears, they have ears, right? But insects have antennas, right? Eyes are compound eyes, but they still have eyes. So there's going to be similarities that way, okay? So what does this really tell me? So I was speaking to some programmers from Silicon Valley, okay? Well, some of the highest and best programmers in the world, right? And I said to them, what would you say this says? It says, look, they said to me, look, Sheikhna, a good programmer never rewrites their code. Once they have a good base code, they use the same base code, and then they just build on it, okay? So what does that tell me? They said, well, if I want to identify who this program goes back to, then I look at their base code, because their base code is their, basically, fingerprint, right? So that tells me if we all start from the same base code and we have similarities, in our base code, that means what? That means we all have the same common program. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So it's not an issue of whether we developed from another species or not. Okay? It's an issue of the fact that we all have the same programmer. You're looking at it from the wrong angle. Now let's say one day somebody comes to you and say, we found the missing link. And truly, let's say it was the missing link. We say, okay, now you have the evidence. We say, نحن أصحاب الدليل نميل معه أينما يميل. We are the people of evidence, right? We follow it wherever it exists. Prove it to me, and I will come your way. There's no problem. But at the end of the road, who created everything? Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the question is, I told you I'd get back to it and we'll finish with this, is that, who benefits from pushing this agenda of we come from apes? The same people who benefit from the agenda of saying that this world comes out of coincidence and that coincidence is randomness, and we prove there's no randomness. We prove there's no coincidence. But why do they do this? Why do they push this agenda on us? So that, well, if everything comes out of coincidence, then there's no purpose to life. There's no purpose to life, then you're going to be lost and searching. So then those who want to, have power will be able to control you, control your thoughts, control your spending patterns, control everything else, right? So then what is it really? It's a fight for power and for control, okay? And who are the ones who control the media and control consumerism, right? That's what you need to ask yourselves. Those are the ones who are trying to control the narrative, right? And so now that we know that of Tawheed, and now that we understand where it's taken me, right? And now that I understand evolution, I understand chaos theory and coincidence, right? Now what remains is to move on to proving if there is a message truly, since Allah will communicate with me, He's got to communicate it with me. What is that message? What message is truly from God, right? Tomorrow we'll talk about that. Who claims that he has a message from God, and how do I prove that it's truly his? Until tomorrow, inshallah, we say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen, wal Fatiha ala arwah al-marhumin, masbuqatan mashwa'atan bi salati ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.